When Chuck gets a call from a small village that they are being terrorized by a giant lizard-like creature, he finds it hard to believe at first. Only when he comes face to face with the animal does he realize it is real and dangerous. He has to take action immediately and come up with a plan to capture it, but he still has no idea what he is actually dealing with. Chuck managed to shoot the giant lizard-like creature with a tranquilizer, and now it was just a waiting game for it to kick in. This did not take long, as soon after the injection the creature started to slow down. When it had come to a complete stop, Chuck and some of the villagers wasted no time tying it up and loading it onto Chuck's truck. Only now were they able to get a good look at the creature and realize what they were dealing with. Chuck could barely believe it, but there was little doubt in his mind when looking at the head of the lizard. But what was the giant lizard-like creature, and why was it such a shock to encounter it? When Chuck first heard about the mysterious lizard, he expected it to be a joke or a case of mistaken identity. At first, the description of the lizard made him think of a crocodile. However, knowing where the village was located, Chuck ruled it out. It was too dry for a crocodile to venture that far and survive. The only logical conclusion was that it was an ordinary-sized lizard and someone was making up silly stories. Chuck played along initially, letting the first caller tell him the whole story, but he didn't take it seriously. However, as more people begged for his help, he started to wonder if he had been wrong. When things like this happened, Chuck almost wished he had competition in the area. He ran the only reptile rescue and animal control service in the whole region. People would call about venomous snakes or pests, but he'd never had a call about a gigantic lizard before. It seemed impossible. He had to find out for himself. It would take several hours to reach the remote village, so he packed several pieces of heavy equipment. As he continued deeper into the countryside, he wondered if he should have brought more. Chuck was surprised by how overjoyed the villagers were to see him. Practically everyone who lived there came out to greet him upon his arrival. Once settled, Chuck began interviewing the villagers to gather information. The lizard had attacked the previous evening, disappearing with one of their goats. It had been doing the same thing every night for almost a week. The villagers were convinced the pattern would continue. If this was a prank, it was a good one. The villagers seemed genuinely terrified. Some villagers had managed to take a few pictures, though no one dared get close. The photos were grainy, shot from a distance at night. However, when Chuck studied them closely, he noticed one important clue that no one else had. He could just make out the image of a tire from one of the villagers' vehicles in the corner of one picture, giving the photo enough perspective for Chuck to see how big the animal really was. Taking deep breaths, he considered what he was facing. Chuck had no idea how he was going to handle the lizard-like monster. He had initially planned to capture it, then figure out what to do next, but that was off the table. It was too large. He wanted to study the creature and learn more about it, but to do so, he needed to catch it alive. But how? Chuck was still working on a plan and talking with the villagers when suddenly there was a commotion in the distance. It took Chuck a minute to realize it was the sound of screaming. The lookouts had spotted the lizard and were racing back to the main village for shelter. Some braver villagers took Chuck to the outskirts to observe it. The lizard liked to hunt at the outlying farms where fewer people were around and more livestock roamed. As Chuck observed, the creature was just preparing to vanish into the trees with a goat trapped in its jaws. Rarely had he encountered a reptile he didn't know on sight, and that certainly applied to gigantic creatures with unusual scales. He had one idea for capturing it: use tranquilizers to sedate the lizard so he could load it onto his truck. However, he needed to find more tranquilizers before it came back. Luckily, Chuck had contacts with wildlife professionals across the country. He arranged a deal to get as many tranquilizers as possible, since he didn't know what would be effective. Chuck called his employees at the reptile rescue and told them to get ready for the largest lizard they could imagine. They would have to clear out an entire retreat to ensure it didn't escape or harm the other animals. Chuck set up the tranquilizer and other equipment at the farm on the edge of town, as the villagers tried to guide the animal there to give Chuck the best shot. Amid the commotion, Chuck observed newcomers. Scientists and journalists had arrived, intrigued by the reports. As the scientists set up their equipment near the water's edge, Chuck became suspicious. "They're not here to study it," he whispered to a friend. They want to capture it. His suspicions grew as he overheard plans to contain and transport the creature. The journalists heightened the villagers' anxiety with probing questions about fear and safety. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Chuck gathered a few trusted villagers. They huddled around a map, planning to keep the creature away from the scientists and journalists by setting up lanterns and making noises. By nightfall, the villagers had assembled nets, ropes, and the tranquilizers Chuck had set up. Hours seemed to stretch endlessly as Chuck and the villagers lay in wait, eyes trained on the farm's entrance. Past midnight, a shadow stirred near the water's edge. The creature crept closer, its silhouette gradually revealing scales and a long, sinuous tail under the moonlight. Taking a deep breath, Chuck positioned his tranquilizer gun and fired. The dart landed with a soft thud on the creature's flank, but it remained unfazed, continuing its exploration. The villagers exchanged worried glances, fearing the tranquilizer had failed. The creature's demeanor then changed, thrashing its tail and creating violent ripples. Chuck quickly reloaded, muttering a silent prayer, and fired a second dart. This time, the creature's movements became sluggish, its roars fading to soft groans. Finally, it slumped to the ground, subdued at last. Relieved, Chuck and the villagers secured the creature, ensuring it posed no further threat. At dawn, scientists approached the creature with excitement, taking measurements, notes, and samples. Dr. Elise Mitchell, a leading biologist, was captivated by the creature, puzzled by its physiology and apparent hybrid nature. After testing the creature's DNA, Dr. Mitchell discovered an unusual blend of genetic markers, suggesting it was a hybrid, possibly a cross between a crocodile and a giant salamander. This revelation sent shockwaves through the scientific community, rewriting taxonomy and reshaping the understanding of species evolution. News channels buzzed with the latest findings, and the once quiet village became a hotspot for tourists and scientists alike. While the village thrived on the newfound fame, it faced challenges in preserving its heritage amidst the modern surge. The creature, now a symbol of nature's mysteries, underscored the importance of understanding and respect for wildlife. The village stood as a beacon of hope, symbolizing the possibility of a harmonious future where mankind and nature thrive in mutual respect and admiration. This story needs to be shared all over the internet. People need to know about this. The creature, now a symbol of nature's mysteries, underscored the importance of understanding and respect for wildlife. Its enigmatic presence reminded humanity of the delicate interconnectedness of all living beings and the need to protect what cannot be replaced. Researchers and conservationists worked hand in hand with the villagers, ensuring the habitat remained unspoiled, even as the world watched with fascination.